Hey, what's up everyone, welcome to the video. Today we're going to have another look at the tier list now that we have some bans for the fight deck specifically. Some things have shifted, some things have not, and we're going to get into that straight away. So first things first, we have Starvo and Chain in the Living Legend slot. These are not allowed to be played in the constructed format for anyone that for whatever reason doesn't know that yet. But for everyone else that does know that stuff, we will get into it straight away. So for the most part, we have a bunch of heroes that I do consider S tier at the moment. These are heroes that have very high win rates of 55% or higher. And we have a bunch of very competitive heroes that are not quite at the same level as the S tier heroes, but are still performing very well in the current format. In terms of S tier plus heroes, we are looking at things like Prism, for example, which is an absolutely magnificent hero that is doing very well in the current meta. We had a bit of a downshift in terms of Prism players because we had a huge uproar of 5 players entering the meta when the Stubby Hammers was still live and legal for play, making it for Prism a little bit more difficult to compete. However, with the Stubby Hammers now gone, Fi has been nerfed a little bit. The deck is still very viable and very playable. It's even very close to Astia, I have to say, from the average win rates that I keep getting into my data set, but it's just like that little bit shy of being like true S tier, even though that we've seen this deck perform really well in the calling in Utrecht, both gaining a first place slot in the European Battle Championship as well as the calling itself, that the top 2 players were a 5 player. The deck is still very close to the same power level, but I do think for now it's still an A tier deck. We of course see a lot of people navigating the deck because people apparently like these one-turn kill conditions in Flesh and Blood, which is something that I'm really not a fan of. Like, don't get me wrong, I also play Fire and I also use the one-turn kill condition in order to win my games, because I don't really feel there is a different viable game plan, at least if you want to be competitive with this deck. But people still love it, even though that win rate is a bit on the low side. People like these casino decks, as I like to call them, similar to Starvo, but Fi just isn't the next Starvo, and it also isn't the Redliner Briar deck, unfortunately. But people still need to learn and see that, I suppose. In terms of other S tier heroes, I do think that Viserai and Briar are both S tier heroes for sure. Both of these have win percentages of over 55%, which is a little bit higher than Fi, and that would definitely put them in here. If I'm not mistaken, at this point of time, Briar is the better one of these 2 heroes in terms of the data that I keep getting. I think part of that has to do that Briar can really set up a big channel mount heroic turn, and Viserai, because Viserai had a lot of nerfs already, even though he can still do those ridiculous 30 damage turns with the rune chance, it's a little bit on the RNG side, I would say. Like, Viserai has a lot of RNG in the deck. A lot of things can go wrong if you draw too many non-attacks, or if you draw too many attacks that you cannot give go again to your stuff. And Briar suffers from that less because Briar has more capability to set up for the next turn by getting a lightning token on the field and getting those earth tokens in order to protect herself from an onslaught of enemy attacks. Dash has been doing really well, however it's just a little bit shy from the S tier, but I do think an aggro Dash deck is definitely in the A tier slot. Is it Fi level good in terms of aggro? Not really. I think at the moment I am still lacking a lot of data for Dash, but I think it's like a 51% win rate deck, which is better than the average and which is kind of good in my opinion, compared to Fi that is pulling off like a 54%ish. So I think Dash is definitely a solid deck if you want to have something anti-meta, especially decks like Viserai and Prism. They have a bit of difficulty handling these super aggro decks because they need to keep their life total rather on the high side in order to pull off their game plan properly, especially Viserai. Like, if Viserai is low on life, then it's pretty much game over for them, because they kind of need their full hand in order to pull off their big damage turns. Otherwise they just have mediocre turns that you can block easily. And I think Dash has a very solid matchup against things like Viserai because of that. Briar again suffers from that less. Briar has a lot more survivability in general, so I think against Briar, I think Dash is a bit at a disadvantage, but against everything else she should do quite well. Azalea, we saw some people navigating Azalea to some top 8 finishes. However, I haven't really seen Azalea get a positive win rate. From what I can see, the win rate is still under 50%. So I'm gonna put it in bottom tier. I don't think this hero is completely bottom tier. I do think it has some potential still. It just needs the right pilot to figure out a proper list for it, and then it can probably go up against the current metagame, because Azalea has a lot of tools that can shut down a huge chunk of the current metagame. Like Fi has issues against Azalea. I think the Rune Blades definitely have issues against her as well. She has some tools to shut those down as well. And I think, I'm not sure how her matchup against Prism is like, but I would assume she does have some tools in her arsenal. Get that? Arsenal to shut down a Prism player, so I'm gonna put her over there. Bravo has been surprisingly gaining ranks quite a bit. I put this hero quite low in my previous video. However, right now the average win percentage for a Bravo deck is kind of on the very positive side, like 56 to 58%. I think a huge chunk of that has to do with so many players playing the Fi deck, and Bravo has a very favorable matchup against those decks because of all the discards and also all the survivability in general. So because of that, Bravo has definitely become an S tier deck. If it wasn't for Bravo, I think Fi would be up here as well. But sadly, a lot of people are now pivoting into this deck, which makes it a lot harder for Fi to be able to operate properly. So Torrentia, I put Torrentia rather high last time, and I still think it's a rather good deck. However, I'm not really sure if it's A tier or higher at the moment. Like, the thing is, like, Torrentia, she has a very good matchup against things like Dromai, but there are just not that many Dromai players in the current format. And we have all these big heroes that kind of pressure her greatly, like all the Rune Blades and stuff like that. And I don't think her matchup is particularly good into Rune Blade. And she does struggle a little bit against things like Prism as well. But at least, does she struggle against Prism? I think she does. Somebody let me know down below, like, if you are a Prism player up against a Torrentia, is it a good matchup for you or not? Because I'm not a Prism player myself, but I would assume that Prism should be able to handle a Torrentia rather easily, right? Am I completely mistaken? Feel free to let me know. So Torrentia did do well for a little bit because of all the Fi players as well, similar to Starvo. If she can get like a glinting steel blade on the field and starts collecting tokens on her weapon, then Fi has a very hard time to catch up. But because we have so many OTK Fis out there that use the Master of the Pouncing Links, like even Torrentia is having a hard time to really set up properly. She doesn't really have that flexibility as she had versus things like my Fi value list that I showcased on the Patreon a couple of weeks ago. So because of that, I think she is currently in a bottom tier. She is very close to being A tier, but right now I think her average win rate is just not there at the moment. Kano is doing very well. Not that many people are navigating Kano, but all the win percentage that I see for the deck are very good. So it's definitely an S tier deck. He has a very good matchup against the Rune Blades. But again, Prism players, please let me know what you think, because I don't really play Prism myself, and I don't really know much about this matchup in general. Katsu not really performing well, unfortunately. Neither is Levaya. Lexi is definitely doing quite well. She has a lot of solid matchups, so Lexi is definitely an A tier deck. Ultim, I previously kept putting Ultim in the S tier. However, as of now, I'm not really sure if this deck should be in S tier anymore, because I haven't really seen that many Ultim players going into the top 8 with the deck, and I'm not really sure which deck is causing issues for it. I guess for one, the Prism decks are very hard to beat for it, and there's quite a chunk of Prism players out there. However, I would have thought that this has a favorable matchup against all the aggro decks in the format, but apparently a lot of Ultim still really struggle against decks like Fi, because they can kind of push damage in very awkward ways that this deck cannot really deal with. So unfortunately, because of that, I think as of now I need to downshift this one to A tier a bit. Rhino, I haven't really seen Rhino do much of anything really in the current metagame. I'm sure that if somebody figures out a proper Rhino deck, it can go very far, but at the moment I haven't seen any good results for it. I haven't really heard any news of anyone really overperforming with it. Because of that, I'm gonna put it in the bottom tier for the time being. Same with Bolton. Like, I have a lot of hope for Bolton. I think this is definitely a sleeper A or S tier deck, even simply because it has that big combo potential with the Lumina Ascension and stuff like that. I'm currently coaching a couple of people that are navigating Bolton in the constructive format, and they are doing extremely well against Vi. They're doing extremely well against Lexi as well as the Runeblades. So I think because of that, it is definitely a deck that should be above the bottom tier. However, in practice, I haven't really seen anyone going that far with it. We did see a Road to Nationals finish with it, getting first place. So I do think people should explore this deck a little bit more, because there's a lot of potential for Bolton. So for now, I'm going to put it in the A tier. But I think with some practice and some optimization, it can even go to S tier. But people really need to give this deck a chance. Like, it has a lot of potential built into there. Give it a go, try it out, you might be surprised. Dromai, definitely another A tier deck. It could even go higher if somebody becomes really an expert at this deck. But I do think the Dromai deck is relatively difficult to navigate. A lot of newer players seem to have quite a bit of issues navigating this deck properly. So therefore we will put it over in the A tier. And in terms of Icelander, I still think the deck has potential, but I haven't really seen it perform at all. Like, really at all. Like, I haven't heard a single person that has been able to get like a 50% or higher win rate with this deck, and because of that, I'm gonna put it right over here. So if you're getting into Flesh and Blood right now and you had to choose a deck, I would say definitely go for one of the Runeblade stars. Are probably some of the strongest decks out there. Runeblade also has a very large card pool available to it, and because Chain reached Living Legend rather recently, we do know that in the near future we might be getting another Chain alternate version in some kind of supplementary product. So I do think in terms of Runeblade, you're very safe investing into it. Living Legend, like Prism is about to reach Living Legend soon, so I do think that playing a Prism deck is not advisable, simply because this deck right now is only 2 points away from reaching Living Legend, and fully investing in a deck like this is not really worth it. Kano is nowhere close to Living Legend, so I think if you want to become a professional Kano player, now is the best time to start. He is nowhere close to Living Legend. He has a lot of tools in his arsenal to be able to counter the current metagame, so definitely give that a try. And Bravo is definitely another deck to pick up. If you want to get started in Flesh and Blood on a budget, I think Fi is a very good budget hero. I will do a budget deck in the next week or so, where I will go over a Fi deck that will cost maybe $50 or less, that will do extremely well in the current metagame. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below. And let me know what you think. Like, do you think I am overjudging some of these heroes? Am I underjudging some of these heroes? Feel free to let me know down in the comments. But for now, I think this list is rather representative of the current metagame. I will go over some actual statistics and some actual numbers in one of my future videos. I'm still trying to validate some of these heroes at the moment. I don't have enough results yet. And Legend Story Studios was not willing to give me the tournament results this time around, so that's a bit of a bummer. Like previously, I would reach out to stores to get a bunch of data, but I thought maybe I could ask Legend Story Studios themselves if they could share the data with me instead, because I don't want to spend weeks and weeks and weeks gathering data from stores, especially when so many stores keep getting angry that I sent them emails. I don't want to get into that same situation again. So right now, I'm pretty much dependent on data from stores that are willing to give it to me, which makes the data collection a little bit slower than it used to be. But luckily we do get access to a nice data set from Flesh and Blood Online, a independent client where people can play Flesh and Blood through a browser. So I will get some data from that, which I will definitely make some videos about in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Anyways, thank you for watching, everyone. Let me know if you liked the video, and I will see you all soon. And if you want to support me, you can always do so by joining my Patreon over on patreon.com/KuganeGaming. Take care.